The discourse surrounding global warming often involves complex scientific data and diverse interpretations. One perspective suggests that the scientific consensus on anthropogenic climate change is robust and widely accepted. This view emphasizes the role of greenhouse gas emissions from human activities as a primary driver of observed warming trends. Conversely, another viewpoint posits that the concept of a global warming hoax is a deliberate fabrication. Proponents of this idea often question the integrity of climate models and the motivations of those advocating for climate action. They might argue that natural climate variability accounts for observed changes, rather than human influence. Historical temperature records and their interpretation are central to both sides of the debate. Some analyses highlight a clear upward trend in global average temperatures over the past century. Others contend that data collection methods or urban heat island effects might skew these records. The role of the sun in climate regulation is another frequently discussed aspect. Some theories suggest that solar cycles and cosmic rays have a more significant impact on Earth's climate than commonly acknowledged. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, is a key institution often cited in discussions. Its reports synthesize thousands of scientific studies to provide comprehensive assessments of climate change. Critics of the hoax narrative often point to the overwhelming scientific consensus as evidence against it. They emphasize that the vast majority of actively publishing climate scientists agree on human-caused warming. Conversely, those who believe in a hoax often highlight dissenting voices or perceived biases within scientific institutions. They might suggest that funding mechanisms or political pressures influence research outcomes. The economic implications of climate policies are a significant part of the debate. Implementing carbon taxes or transitioning to renewable energy sources can have substantial economic costs. Some argue these costs could hinder economic growth and disproportionately affect developing nations. Others counter that the costs of inaction, such as extreme weather events and resource scarcity, would be far greater. The concept of control is central to the hoax narrative. It is often suggested that climate change is used as a pretext for increasing governmental power or implementing a globalist agenda. This perspective sometimes links climate policies to broader geopolitical strategies. The role of media in shaping public perception is also frequently discussed. Some believe that mainstream media outlets present a biased view, emphasizing alarmist narratives. Conversely, proponents of climate action argue that media coverage often understates the urgency of the issue. The history of environmental movements provides context for the current debate. Early environmental concerns focused on pollution and resource depletion. The shift towards global warming as a primary concern occurred in the late 20th century. Scientific understanding of the greenhouse effect dates back to the 19th century. Svante Arrhenius, in 1896, first calculated how changes in atmospheric carbon dioxide could affect Earth's temperature. His work laid some of the groundwork for later climate science. The Keeling curve, initiated in 1958, provided continuous measurements of atmospheric CO2. This data became a crucial piece of evidence for rising greenhouse gas concentrations. The political dimensions of climate change are undeniable. International agreements like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement aim to address emissions globally. However, debates persist over national responsibilities and equitable burden sharing. The concept of climate justice highlights the disproportionate impact of climate change on vulnerable communities. Some argue that developed nations, historically larger emitters, bear greater responsibility. Hoax narrative often dismisses these concerns, focusing instead on perceived overreach. The role of fossil fuel industries in the climate debate is a contentious issue. Accusations of lobbying and misinformation campaigns are sometimes leveled against these industries. Conversely, industry representatives often emphasize their contributions to energy security and economic prosperity. The scientific method itself is sometimes scrutinized within the hoax framework. Questions are raised about peer review processes and the openness of scientific data. Mainstream science emphasizes transparency and reproducibility as core tenets. The concept of tipping points in the climate system is a serious concern for many scientists. These are thresholds beyond which large-scale, irreversible changes could occur. Examples include the melting of ice sheets and the collapse of ocean currents. Those who view global warming as a hoax often dismiss these scenarios as alarmist speculation. The role of computer models in climate projections is a frequent point of contention. Critics argue that models are inherently uncertain and cannot accurately predict future climate. Scientists counter that models are constantly refined and validated against historical data. The debate also touches upon the concept of consensus itself. Some argue that scientific consensus is not proof, and that science progresses through challenging established views. However, proponents of climate action emphasize that consensus in science is based on rigorous evidence and peer review. The Climatigate email controversy in 2009 fueled skepticism among some. Leaked emails were interpreted by some as evidence of scientific misconduct or manipulation. Subsequent investigations largely cleared the scientists involved of wrongdoing. Nevertheless, the incident left a lasting impact on public trust for some segments of the population. The role of government agencies and international bodies is often viewed with suspicion by hoax proponents. They might see these entities as instruments of control rather than neutral scientific arbiters. Conversely, supporters of these bodies emphasize their role in coordinating research and policy responses. The concept of carbon footprint became widely popularized. This encouraged individuals to consider their personal contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. Some critics argue this shifts blame from large corporations to individuals. The debate also involves discussions about renewable energy technologies. Advocates highlight their potential for clean energy and job creation. Skeptics sometimes raise concerns about their intermittency, cost, or environmental impact of manufacturing. The role of extreme weather events in the climate narrative is significant. Many scientists link increasing frequency and intensity of such events to climate change. Those who believe in a hoax often attribute these events to natural cycles or random variability. The concept of geoengineering is sometimes proposed as a potential solution. This involves large-scale interventions to alter Earth's climate system. However, geoengineering raises ethical and practical concerns. The hoax narrative often views such proposals as further evidence of attempts at control. Public opinion on climate change varies significantly across different demographics and regions. Factors like political affiliation, education, and personal experience influence beliefs. The role of think tanks and advocacy groups is also part of the broader discussion. These organizations often promote specific narratives and policy positions. The scientific community generally emphasizes the importance of evidence-based policy making. The precautionary principle is often invoked in climate policy discussions. This principle suggests taking action to prevent harm, even when scientific certainty is not absolute. Critics of this principle argue it can lead to unnecessary regulations and economic burdens. The concept of climate refugees highlights the human cost of environmental changes. Rising sea levels and desertification could force populations to migrate. The hoax narrative often downplays or denies the severity of these potential impacts. The role of education in shaping understanding of climate change is crucial. Curricula in schools and universities often include climate science. However, debates exist over the neutrality and comprehensiveness of such education. The hockey stick graph became an iconic representation of global temperature trends. It showed a relatively stable temperature for centuries, followed by a sharp increase in recent decades. This graph faced intense scrutiny and criticism from skeptics. Subsequent research largely reaffirmed its findings, albeit with some refinements. The concept of carbon capture and storages, CCS, is another technological solution discussed. This technology aims to capture CO2 emissions from industrial sources and store them underground. Critics raise concerns about its cost, scalability, and long-term effectiveness. The hoax narrative often views CCS as an expensive distraction or a way to perpetuate fossil fuel use. The role of individual scientists and their public statements is also part of the narrative. Some scientists become prominent advocates for climate action. Others become vocal critics of the mainstream climate narrative. The scientific community generally encourages open debate and scrutiny of findings. However, the line between legitimate scientific skepticism and denial can be blurred in public discourse. The concept of net zero emissions has gained traction as a policy goal. This aims to balance greenhouse gas emissions with their removal from the atmosphere. Achieving net zero requires significant technological and societal transformations. The hoax narrative often views such ambitious goals as unrealistic or economically damaging. The role of international cooperation in addressing climate change is paramount for many. Global problems require global solutions, they argue. Conversely, some emphasize national sovereignty and self-interest. The debate over climate change is deeply intertwined with values and worldviews. It touches upon beliefs about humanity's relationship with nature. It also involves differing views on the role of government and individual liberty. The scientific community continues to conduct research and refine its understanding. New data and methodologies constantly emerge. The hoax narrative, however, often remains resistant to new evidence. The discussion is not merely about scientific facts, but also about trust. Trust in institutions, in experts, and in information sources. The internet and social media have profoundly impacted the spread of information and misinformation. Echo chambers can reinforce existing beliefs, making it difficult for alternative perspectives to penetrate. The challenge lies in fostering constructive dialogue amidst deeply entrenched positions. Understanding the various arguments is key to navigating this complex issue. Whether one views it as science or control, the debate continues to shape global policy and public discourse. The future trajectory of Earth's climate remains a subject of intense scientific inquiry. Researchers are constantly refining their models and gathering new data. The complexity of Earth's climate system presents inherent challenges to prediction. Natural feedback loops can amplify or dampen initial changes. The role of aerosols, for instance, is a nuanced area of study. Some aerosols can have a cooling effect, counteracting warming from greenhouse gases. However, their overall impact and longevity are still subjects of active research. The pause or hiatuses in global warming observed in the early 2000s was a point of contention. Skeptics cited it as evidence against human-caused warming. Scientists later attributed it to natural variability and heat absorption by oceans. The long-term trend of warming remained evident despite this short-term fluctuation. The Arctic region is experiencing warming at a faster rate than the global average. This has implications for sea level rise and global weather patterns. The hoax narrative often dismisses the severity of these regional changes. The role of methane, a potent greenhouse gas, is also a growing concern. Sources include natural wetlands, agriculture, and fossil fuel extraction. Reducing methane emissions is seen as a crucial short-term climate action. The hoax narrative sometimes focuses on the natural sources of methane to downplay human impact. The concept of climate sensitivity refers to how much Earth's temperature will rise for a doubling of CO2. This is a key parameter in climate models and a subject of ongoing research. Different estimates of climate sensitivity exist, contributing to uncertainty ranges. The hoax narrative often exploits these uncertainties to cast doubt on the entire premise. The role of ocean acidification is another significant environmental concern. As oceans absorb more CO2, their pH decreases, impacting marine life. This is a direct chemical consequence of increased atmospheric CO2, separate from warming. The hoax narrative sometimes overlooks or downplays this distinct issue. Concept of attribution science's attempts to link specific extreme weather events to climate change. This field uses statistical methods to assess the human influence on such events. While challenging, it provides insights into the changing nature of weather patterns. The hoax narrative often rejects attribution science as speculative or biased. The debate also involves discussions about historical climate events. Past warm periods, like the medieval warm period, are sometimes cited by skeptics. Scientists explain these as regional phenomena or driven by different factors than current warming. The current rate of warming is unprecedented in recent geological history. The hoax narrative often emphasizes natural cycles to downplay the current anomaly. The role of international organizations like the United Nations is also scrutinized. Some view them as promoting a globalist agenda through climate policy. Others see them as essential platforms for multilateral cooperation on shared challenges. The concept of sustainable development is often linked to climate action. This aims to meet present needs without compromising future generations. The hoax narrative sometimes views sustainable development as a guise for economic restructuring. The debate over climate change is a microcosm of broader societal tensions. It reflects differing views on progress, technology, and human impact on the planet. The scientific community continues to emphasize the urgency of addressing climate change. They highlight the potential for severe and widespread impacts if emissions are not reduced. The hoax narrative, conversely, often promotes a message of resilience and adaptation without drastic policy changes. The future of the planet and humanity's role in it remains a central question. The discussion is not just about data, but also about values and visions for the future. Navigating this complex landscape requires critical thinking and an open mind. Understanding the nuances of both scientific findings and skeptical arguments is essential. The public discourse around global warming is dynamic and constantly evolving. New research, events, and political developments shape the conversation. The role of individual action versus systemic change is another facet of the debate. Some emphasize personal responsibility, while others focus on policy and industry shifts. The hoax narrative often champions individual liberty over collective mandates. The scientific community generally advocates for a combination of both individual and systemic efforts. The concept of planetary boundaries provides a framework for understanding Earth's limits. Crossing these boundaries could lead to irreversible environmental degradation. Climate change is considered one of these critical boundaries. The hoax narrative often dismisses the concept of planetary boundaries as alarmist. The role of indigenous knowledge in understanding climate change is gaining recognition. Traditional ecological knowledge offers unique perspectives on environmental shifts. This contrasts with purely Western scientific approaches for some. The hoax narrative typically does not engage with indigenous perspectives. The concept of greenwashing is also part of the broader discussion. This refers to companies or organizations making misleading claims about their environmental efforts. It highlights the need for genuine and verifiable climate action. The hoax narrative sometimes uses greenwashing examples to discredit all climate initiatives. The psychological aspects of climate change are increasingly studied. Concepts like climate anxiety and eco-grief describe emotional responses to the crisis. The hoax narrative often dismisses these as emotional overreactions. The role of future generations in the climate debate is a powerful moral argument. Decisions made today will profoundly impact their lives. The hoax narrative sometimes prioritizes present economic concerns over long-term environmental stewardship. The scientific community emphasizes the intergenerational equity aspect of climate action. The debate is not just about science, but also about ethics and responsibility. It challenges humanity to consider its place within the natural world. The question of science or control ultimately reflects a deeper societal introspection. It asks what kind of future we are building, and for whom. The ongoing dialogue, however contentious, is a vital part of this process. Understanding the various perspectives is crucial for informed decision-making. The complexity of the issue demands careful consideration from all sides. Ultimately, the path forward will depend on how societies choose to interpret the evidence, and how they choose to act upon their understanding. The narrative of hoax versus science continues to evolve. It is a reflection of broader societal anxieties and aspirations. The scientific community remains committed to rigorous research. They continue to provide data and analyses for public and policy consideration. The hoax narrative, meanwhile, persists in various forms. It often adapts to new information, interpreting it through its own lens. Challenge for public understanding is immense. Distinguishing between credible information and misinformation is crucial. The future of climate policy will likely be shaped by this ongoing tension, and by the collective choices made by societies worldwide. The implications extend beyond environmental concerns. They touch upon economic stability, social equity, and global security. The debate is a reflection of humanity's evolving relationship with its planet, and its capacity for collective action in the face of complex challenges. The narrative continues to unfold. With each passing year, new data emerges, and new perspectives are articulated. The conversation is far from over. It remains a critical global discussion, shaping the future of our world, challenging our understanding of science, society, and control.